the most influential tech event on the planet. We are so happy you're here. I'm Tyler Suiters with the Consumer Technology Association. We are the owner and the producer of CES. Welcome to Gary's Book Club, where we are talking to the leading authors on innovation and technology with brand new books for you to experience. We'll have a conversation today, and then afterward our author will have time for you to ask your questions and also sign books if you're interested. The topic today, authentic inclusion, and that's going to take a little explanation. So I'd like to have you help me welcome to the stage today's author, Frances West. Frances, thank you. Frances, so glad you're here. First of all, let me start, before we get into the book, with a little bit about your background, because you are a career IBM, I'd say executive, that's where you ended, not where you started, but major keynote today to kick off CES from current president and CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty. And a number of issues touched on authentic inclusion to some degree. So if I might ask, your impressions of today's keynote, what Ginny had to say, and what it means in the larger workspace for the future.
Well, I think it was really an honor to, number one, to be here, and then to have Ginny Rometty, my CEO, to kick it off when she really tied together the future direction of technology, talked about deep data, and also broad AI, but then she circled back and talked about all these technology has to have purpose, and that leaders, especially tech leaders, need to really focus on making sure that we put the human and talent back in the center of everything we do. So I thought it was a terrific kickoff and a great setup actually for this discussion.
It does fit in nicely. Frances's book, Authentic Inclusion, Drives Disruptive Innovation. So there's your tie to technology and our larger innovation sector. Frances, I think it's probably most poignant and helpful if we start with a definition of authentic inclusion. I'll just read the first line off the back cover and let you elaborate, but authentic inclusion is the institutional insight that human diversity is at the core of disruptive innovation. That's something that should make every one of us sit up and take notice when we're talking about disruption and innovation in the same sentence. I'll just ask you to take it from there and fill out that definition in your words.
So I think based on my work in IBM for the past 30 plus years, and frankly based on my personal experience as a woman in technology, as a first generation immigrant, and that in my journey, both professionally and personally, I felt like by being different, actually bring about a different way of looking at problems, a different way of solving problems. So to me, any organization that strive for sustainability or scalability, they really need to focus on having talent that have a very diverse background and perspective. And then because we're in the business technology area, we're not just talking about this topic as an advocacy topic. I think enterprise or institution really need to think about how do they sustain it, and that's why the definition includes the sustainability of inclusion.
Sustainability, clearly a key term here. What about the timing, Frances? Why now? Both for the timing on why to write a book on this topic, but also why is the technology and really the larger business sector looking at inclusion and diversity as such an integral element of business strategy?
Well, just like Ginny talked about this morning, and also the work that I've done in IBM research, we can see that the technology is taking on an extremely fast trajectory to become extremely personalized. I mean, for many years, when the computer first came on, it was really more about the back office, or people call it mainframe. But now everybody uses technology for their learning, for their living, for their playing. And that also we're just about to embark on this artificial intelligence. So if we don't think about technology, inclusion, and diversity thinking at this juncture, I'm afraid that we could potentially cement certain unconscious bias in our, for example, artificial intelligence design or experience, like a driverless car. How do you give your end user who are aging or different abilities the kind of user experience that's really meaningful. Those are very, very important. So the timing actually is critical now.
And there's a bit of an intersection, and I'm going to oversimplify this, I'm sure, an intersection of talent and technology, right? This competitive landscape that has a desire and need for the best talent available, but also the technology sector has to drive that just in terms of the need for such highly skilled and often specialized people.
What I often hear people talk about, it's almost like talent is independent of technology. And then you got the technologists, the CIOs and CTOs spending a lot of time researching or developing new technology, whether it's AR, VR, or IoT, and whatever. And then on the other side, you have the talent people, right? You have the HR. But rarely do they come together. And to me, because we know that technology is underpinning everything we do, and that it's really critical that when we think about talent, we actually think about the technology infrastructure at the workplace, whether it can enable diversity of talent in their productivity. And same thing on the talent side, people really need to have, each individual need to have a strong sense that technology is going to be critical. So am I in a position, am I learning the right access to technology to make me more productive?
If we could, let's dive back a few decades and look back at your career at IBM. And to be clear, Francis is a bit of an outlier in that you spent virtually your entire career at one company. How has your work at IBM, how did it evolve from where you started, when you started at this company?
I almost still want to share how many years I've had away. But let me just put it this way. When I first started, we were using punch cards. So I'm that old. I'm of that generation. But over the years, even though it's one company, I would say IBM is big enough. Some people would say it's almost the revenue is equivalent to a GDP of some small country.
Sure.
So over the years, I had a lot of opportunity to work in different places and also different countries. Like in the mid-90s, actually, I was in China helping IBM to open up the financial services sectors. So it is very interesting to see the technology from what we call the back office system-based optimization to now the front office, not even the front office of an individual, and how to make the individual experience and access more meaningful. It's a complete shift in terms of technology consumption. It's actually quite exciting, but then it also comes with, I think, a certain sense of responsibility that all the technology company has to have, because now you're not just talking about efficiency, you're talking about affecting people's lives and especially the future generation.
If I could, I'd like to read a brief passage from chapter 5 of your book. And this delves into the history of IBM, but gives what I thought was a fascinating slice of life historically. So, quoting now, and this is about IBM's long-standing commitment to diversity and accessibility. IBM hired its first African-American employee in 1899, its first employee with a disability in 1914. So those dates strike you as particularly, but then you put it in perspective that this was decades before the Civil Rights Act, 1964, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, 1990. That sheds some light on how far we have come in a relatively short period of time in terms of recognizing the importance of authentic inclusion.
Right. I mean, so this actually goes to the essence of the title of the book, Authentic Inclusion. I do see and think that at least in the past few years, there's a lot of talk about inclusion. It's almost politically incorrect not to talk about inclusion. But and the message in the book is really aimed at the senior executives, the C-suites, and the board levels, because to me, any business, if they want to have a sustainability, if the startup today, well, I guess you have 1,200 startup,
Yes.
You want them to sustain. You want them to become the next IBM, 100 years from now. And that it's very important that the leaders at the helm of the company really understand inclusion. It's not something you do just because the social pressure. And the example I think the IBM founder did was that they really thought about inclusion in this context, give them the competitive, disruptive innovation advantage. They didn't do it because of a charity. Back then, I don't think there was even charity or philanthropy kind of mindset. They did it because they make a business difference.
Right. The next line here, again, some dates that floor me. IBM promoted its first female vice president in 1943. And in 1953, IBM became the first U.S. corporation to mandate that employees would be hired without regard to race, color, or creed. Now, 1953 doesn't seem like that long ago to be that progressive, but again, this is before there was federal legislation dealing with this. So how does that, I know you had to dig historically, how does a company develop that sort of ethos, that sort of integrity to be in front of the curve, to do something before there's regulation, before there's legislation?
Well, I think you hit it right on the mark. I think this word integrity actually means a lot, right? And also, it's easy to talk about things like purpose and integrity, but how do you operationalize in a company on a day-to-day basis? This morning in the kickoff, Gary talked about policy being important. The government set policies, but I think companies also needs to have, at least in IBM, we have what we call a corporate instruction. It's almost like corporate policies. Mm-hmm. So each company should think about how do you take topics like inclusion and how do you set up, guidelines so that you can measure against it. Just like a business initiative implementing, let's say, privacy and security. I think these kind of measurable actions is going to be very important to make inclusion authentic.
So recognizing our audience, both today and overall at CES, at what point is that kind of integrity built into your business's DNA or your structure or even your business plan? At what point is it, I'm trying to phrase it the right way, is it ever too soon or is it never too soon to have that as a guidepost for your company, whether that's a startup with 2 people or you're at the 200 or 2,000 person stage?
Well, I think it starts with the very beginning. There has to be a DNA of the company, right? Because that's why as a founder or as a startup, executive, this is one of those things you kind of decide where your direction is, where your true north is. And it doesn't necessarily have to take extra effort. But if you think about it ahead of time, you really believe in it. We've seen the situation lately, especially in some of the Silicon Valleys, where we went for what I call profit-only kind of a thinking. We look for the fast, quick win, but eventually it catches up with you, right? So, for example, the privacy issue now is huge. So I think it's one of those. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I really believe that every human being wants to do the right thing, but perhaps some of the business schools, especially in the United States, are pushing the profit-seeking kind of mantra a little too far, and that we really need to balance out with the principle and purpose. Right, well, which is, of course, the second part of the definition of authentic.
You beat me to the punch. Right. Exactly, Francis. One of the phrases that starts, I believe it's chapter 5 in your book, is tech by people for people. That seems like a bit of a mission statement or a guiding statement of principle for any technology company.
Right. I think, again, if we believe that if any of the startup that's sitting out here or enterprise company, if you say my goal is to serve all my customers, then you're talking about humanity in general. And if that's the case, you really have to, in my view, then you have to take it too far that you're going to try to make it really not just accessible but barrier-free for everyone. Right? You cannot design for one and say, okay, let me come back and redesign for another, because we don't have that kind of a time and resources to redo. So this goes back to the point I made earlier. There are, it's inclusion, or especially authentic inclusion, is not a rocket scientist topic. It really is fine with how you think about it. If you think ahead of time as part of your DNA, part of your construct, part of your policy, then your employee is going to want to follow, because this is a good thing for the business.
Right.
And frankly, I believe that it's going to be a talent differentiator for company, because I know I see in the audience actually a lot younger than me, a millennial, and I actually am very positive about millennial. They actually have a stronger sense of a community, a social responsibility. I think that the millennial, they will want to look for a company that have that kind of integrity and principle in play.
So that's an interesting issue you address in the book, Francis, which is inclusion as a business strategy, right? That you build this into your business objectives.
Right. This is, I think this has to be part of what I call the business imperatives. It's not something you do separately. I think especially if you're a consumer-facing product companies, then this has to be something you measure against as part of your business, whether it's your market expansion plan or your revenue plan, and it should be measurable.
Right. Does it remind you a little bit of the idea of, say, 10 years ago, so many very large multinationals building sustainability into their objectives, not making it something that we feel like we should do or we want to do. It's something we need to do as a business.
Right. I mean, there is a complete parallel of accessibility or digital inclusion along with the environmental movement, and not surprisingly, both initiatives was kind of championed through organizations like United Nations. When the United Nations passed the Human Rights Treaty of People with Disability in 2006, that's about 10 years later than the first Kyoto Treaty of Environmental Movement. And of course, we have seen how the environmental movement has moved the dial, and it went from kind of a tree-hugging advocacy topic to now carbon trading is a very substantial book of business that people are talking about.
Right.
So same kind of phenomena I think is going to happen on digital inclusion. Another driving reason is because I don't know whether you know, but the world is aging. I mean, by 2050, we're going to have more people older than younger people. I mean, you have countries like Japan, Spain, Italy, and Germany are aging. So if you design technology, it's not just for the 20-30 something. Most of your consumer is on the other side of the hill, so to speak, which I can relate.
Yeah, I'm getting close as well. I'm with you. Backing up just for a moment to your point about developing objectives, Francis. Moving forward in the book, quoting again, prioritizing return on investment alone is a very operational view of business potential. In other words, what can I spend and what can I bring back? You continue, but focusing on return on innovation holds that because we are looking at areas or populations that have historically been underserved. We need a different kind of metric. I'll let you explain.
So I think, the world is a competitive place. We all know that. Everybody's looking for that next white space or green field and whatever, right?
I like blue sky, but yes, same thing.
Right. And yet there is a population, like I said, for example, CTA Foundation is doing a lot of work in the people with disability area, and we know that 50% of the world population, no matter where you go, 50% of the population in general has a disability. That actually translates into like $8 trillion worth of disposable income. I mean, incredible amount of money, because just because you have some disability, it doesn't mean that you don't bank, you don't shop, you don't buy things. And I would say, for the most part, they actually potentially will do more online shopping, will do online buying, they will try out the gadgets to make their life more productive. So I think there is a huge opportunity that's not being understood or focused on. And so from that standpoint, we have both a market opportunity, but we also have innovation opportunity in play as well.
So I think of you also as including some disruption of your own in your book, and you're a bit of a disruptive innovator in your guidance, talking about if people have discomfort with this in the workplace, if you're not used to this, if you feel discomfort, your advice is very simple: get physical. That will take a little bit of explanation, but it's very direct and quite literal too.
Right. So there is a little chapter. I really believe that. Human being by nature, we like to be. We're tribal. We like to be our own tribe. There's a comfort level. So anytime when you cross tribe, there is a little bit of a deliberate effort. So the topic with diversity or inclusion, I think it has to be more than just words. It has to be action. And when I say get physical, meaning literally get close to somebody that, for example, you have never experienced. I talked about in the book the first time I went to CES, which is the world's largest assistive technology conference in San Diego about 10, 12 years ago. I was blown away then to see how some of the blind professionals were able to use braille, mobile braille devices to do their work. Again, if I didn't get up close and witness that, I would not be able to comprehend how would a blind person surf the web, how would a deaf person, understand, different spoken languages. So again, make an effort to get to know somebody physically. This is very important.
I love that advice. I want to be clear about your guidance, Francis, because this is not easy. This is not formulaic, and it's not merely a choice that ends in success. It has to be deliberate and conscious each step of the way. And the final passage I want to read speaks to that. So this is under your subchapter for executives, and for all of our small business and startup leaders out there, this is for you. Quoting you now, Francis: for topics like these, there's no formula. You can't simply measure input and output and generate a perfect answer. You continue: this challenge is compounded by the fact that many of our decisions have a long-term impact. The ultimate outcome won't be evident in weeks, months, or quarters. Okay, it's easy to say when you're starting up and deciding to take one step down this path of authentic inclusion, but that sounds like guidance that almost needs to be written in stone somewhere in your office, or maybe it's a sticker on your laptop, that you need to see regularly as you're dealing with quarterly returns and weekly data, or even daily feedback, that this is a long-term process.
Well, this is we're talking about cultural shift, right? Anytime when you talk about cultural shift and you're dealing with humans, human is not simple, right? Human is complex. Unless you're artificial intelligence, but even artificial intelligence, we heard about, you need quantum technology, because things are the low-hanging fruit. The simple human problems are being solved. It's what's left behind are complex problems. So I think it's not so much as complex. I think it's one of those things that you have to stay with it. Once you set the goal to say this is, or if you're a CEO, you say this diversity is something we're going to do. If you do it day in, day out, then it's going to happen, and it's going to have a multiplier effect, because people is going to follow not what you say, but what you do, and then you're going to see the outcome is not it's not just incremental, but it could be geometric. So to me, that is the most important part of authentic inclusion, is that how do we do the right thing from the get-go, and then how do we amplify so that has a sustainability that really create the purposeful change that both the consumer or employees or yourselves.
Final question, Francis, and this is why it's tough. I want to limit you to 1 minute, right? But how does your definition of authentic inclusion how is it going to change? How will it evolve in the decades to come? Not just years, but when do we ever stop looking at someone based on appearance or based on abilities or displays? When do we get to the next phase or change the Rubicon of what inclusion involves?
Well, I think eventually, hopefully, the word inclusion will just melt away, right? I mean, if we truly, because again, earlier today in the kickoff, we talked about that AI or robots can take over a lot of the simple, relatively simple binary tasks of a human being. I think in my book I talked about as robots getting more human, the human needs to get more human, right? So we actually have to move up the food chain to think about what is the meaningful thing that I can think about, I can design into my product services that will lead to the experience that really have a purpose. And I think that's the whole essence of a human being on this planet. Is I know I'm going to sound like a little existentialist, but I do believe that the technologists, especially this audience, have that opportunity. But if you don't consciously or purposely think about it, and you will create unimaginable problems for generations to come. I mean, that is going back to one of your first question. That's why I'm so so focused on getting the message out here and now. Because I think, frankly, if I do the book 5 years from now, I actually feel like it will be too late, because a lot of the infrastructure, everybody's talking about platform and infrastructure, is being built as we speak today.
I'm glad we're ending on an inspirational note, and this is the right audience. The book is Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation. The author, longtime IBM executive, Francis West. Francis, a pleasure to have you with us. And Francis will have books available. We'll be signing right behind us at the CTA Center for the next hour. So thank you, Francis. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful CES 2019.